Hello, welcome to the channel. Subscribe, leave a like, and don't forget to write a comment. Enjoy watching.
You ever look back at your life and realize you were the background character in your own damn story? Like the kind of person people barely notice unless they need something? That's how I spent the first 30-something years of my life. Smiling through clenched teeth, clapping for other people's wins, trying not to look like I was waiting for someone to clap for mine. My name's Jenna, and I was the oldest daughter in a house where being seen meant being useful and being loved meant being born second. Growing up in suburban Indiana, nothing about our house screamed dysfunctional. We weren't broke. We weren't wealthy either, but things were stable. Dad worked in insurance. Mom did the books for a dentist's office. And we had 2 cars, a dog, and a front yard. My mom kept obsessively tidy, like it was auditioning for a home and garden cover shoot. But somewhere between the picket fence and the holiday photos, I learned to keep my voice down, my head straight, and my needs small. Because Kayla, my little sister, she had this way of soaking up all the space in a room like a warm light. Blonde curls, dimples, and a scream that turned to a giggle in a heartbeat. People adored her. She cried, the world stopped. I cried, and it was, "Can't you be more like Kayla?" At 7, I won first place in a regional spelling bee. It was the only time in my life I got a trophy that wasn't a participation award. I remember standing there, holding that ridiculous gold plastic thing like it was an Oscar. I looked out into the crowd, scanning faces, already knowing, empty seats. Mom said she had to take Kayla to a dentist appointment. Kayla had a loose tooth. Dad was caught up at work. That was the beginning of a pattern I wouldn't recognize until much later. My accomplishments were never quite enough to compete with Kayla's needs, no matter how small. By the time I hit high school, it was just a running joke. Don't worry, Jenna doesn't need an audience. She's independent. My junior year, I got into the varsity soccer team. First game, I scored twice. The bleachers were packed with parents waving signs and cowbells. Mine were empty. Kayla had her ballet dress rehearsal, and apparently, that was more important. Again. When college came, I pushed myself to the edge. Scholarships, part-time jobs, sleepless nights. I didn't party, I didn't mess around. I just wanted something of my own. Something that couldn't be compared or taken or ignored. I graduated magna cum laude. I sent out invites, made hotel arrangements, even offered to pay for my parents' gas. The night before the ceremony, Mom called. "Your father's not feeling well," she said. "And Kayla has a cheerleading final, so we're just going to stay back this time. This time, like they'd ever come before." I sat on that stage, staring into a sea of cheering families, while mine pretended I didn't exist. That night, I cried for the first time in years. Not loud, not messy, just quiet, exhausted tears. I didn't cry because they didn't come. I cried because deep down, I already knew they wouldn't. And yet, I kept showing up. Birthdays, holidays, family barbecues. Meet the responsible one, the reliable one. Helping with dishes, buying presents for people who barely remembered mine, babysitting Kayla's kids when she needed me time. I became the utility daughter, always there, always helpful, always second. But the day everything snapped wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't even a fight. It was a text. Kayla had just graduated from college. Finally, after 2 gap years, 3 major changes, and a semester off to find herself. My phone buzzed with a family group photo, all smiling on a beach deck. Champagne in hand, sun setting behind them like a goddamn Hallmark movie. The caption read, "Surprise, Kayla's graduation gift, her very own beach house." I stared at that photo for 5 solid minutes, like maybe it would change if I blinked hard enough. I didn't get a graduation party. I didn't even get dinner. I got a card with $50 in it and a "We're proud of you" voicemail. That beach house, fully furnished, waterfront, probably 6 figures easy, was proof. Proof that I was never the favorite, never even close. I didn't get forgotten. I got dismissed. So I did what I should have done years ago. I hit reply on my mom's latest message about Kayla's big weekend and typed something I'd never dared say out loud. "Congratulations to Kayla. Don't worry about me. I'm done pretending." Then I hit block. on all of them. And here's where it gets weird. I thought cutting them off would be like slipping out of a room nobody noticed I was in. But the second I stepped away, their phones lit up like it was breaking news. Suddenly, I mattered. Suddenly, they were desperate. And that was just the beginning. There's a strange kind of silence that follows clarity, not the peaceful kind, not the relief of letting go, but a silence that feels like the air right before a storm, heavy and waiting, thick with the weight of everything you've allowed until now. That's exactly how it felt sitting in my living room, holding my phone like it had turned into a weapon, scrolling through those bright, overexposed pictures of my family on the beach, every smile a blade twisting just a little deeper into a place I thought had already gone numb. The sky behind them was painted in the kind of orange and pink hues that artists struggle to imitate. The champagne flutes were raised. Kayla stood front and center holding a set of keys like she'd just won the lottery. And in some ways she had. They bought her a beach house, not rented for the weekend. Not an Airbnb, bought. The caption said it clear as daylight. For our sweet girl who never gave up, we wanted to give you a place of your own to celebrate your next chapter. We're so proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad. I stared at that line, reading it again and again, as if repetition would make it less absurd, as if somewhere between the letters there would be a justification I had missed. A footnote that said, P.S. We realize this might be a slap in the face to Jenna, but who cares? It wasn't just the beach house. It was everything it stood for. The years I'd spent clawing my way through school, never asking for help, never demanding more than I thought I deserved, and most of all, never making them feel guilty for choosing her over and over. They had chosen her when they skipped my spelling bee to buy her a birthday cake. They chose her when I got my driver's license, and they were too tired to go for a drive, but drove 6 hours for her soccer game. They chose her every time I was quiet about it, and they chose her again when they handed her a house, like a prize for merely finishing what I had completed 15 years ago, with no fanfare and no reward. You know what made it worse? I wasn't even surprised. Shocked, maybe, but not surprised. Somewhere deep down, I had known this would happen. Not the beach house specifically, no, but I knew that if she finished something, even if it took her 3 extra years and a complete change in direction, they would move mountains to make her feel special. And me, they had sent me a card, a cheap folded-up piece of cardboard with a Bible quote and a check that bounced the first time I tried to deposit it. Still, I didn't cry. Not this time. I didn't call anyone. I didn't scream or curse or throw the phone across the room, although every cell in my body begged for some kind of release. I just sat there very still, the way you do when you realize the fire has already burned through, and now you're just sifting through ash. There was nothing left to salvage. The message had been delivered loud and clear. I was not their priority. I never had been. Later that night, a text from my mom buzzed through, like she'd sensed the tension in the air, or maybe realized I hadn't replied to the group chat. It read, "Hope you're doing well, honey. Wish you could have been here. Kayla asked about you." I read it slowly, letting the words settle. It was almost comical in its cluelessness, like they genuinely believed I had missed the event because of scheduling, like I wasn't invited, acknowledged, or even thought of beyond a casual afterthought. And that final line, "Kayla asked about you," that was the nail in the coffin. Kayla, the golden child, hadn't even noticed I wasn't there until someone pointed it out. I didn't reply right away. I went for a walk, something I do when I feel like my skin's too tight and the thoughts are crashing into each other too loud to ignore. I passed the same old park I used to take Kayla to when Mom needed a break. The same one I had sat in, shivering under an old sweatshirt, while she played with friends and I waited, always waiting. That walk didn't clear my head, it sharpened it. By the time I got back home, I knew exactly what I needed to say. I opened the message thread, hovered over the text, and without overthinking it, typed back, "Congratulations to Kayla. Don't worry about me. I'm done pretending." Then I went through my contact list like someone cutting out a tumor, blocked Mom, blocked Dad, blocked Kayla, deleted the group chat, wiped out every point of connection like it was toxic mold. I didn't do it in anger. I did it like someone finally understanding that just because people share your blood doesn't mean they care about your heartbeat. And here's the part I didn't expect. I figured, after all these years of being invisible, no one would notice I was gone. Maybe a day or two of awkward silence in the chat. Maybe someone would mention it at Thanksgiving. What I didn't expect, what I couldn't have predicted, was what happened next. Because when the reliable one walks away, when the one who always shows up suddenly stops answering, people panic. And my family, they didn't just notice, they unraveled. The first text came within 24 hours, then another, then a call, then 5. By the end of the week, my phone was lighting up like Times Square, full of "we're worried about you" and "what's going on," and "let's talk, this isn't like you." But it was like me. The real me, the version they never took the time to know. And finally, for once, I had no interest in helping them figure it out. The thing about walking away, really walking away, not in the heat of an argument or during a dramatic exit where the door slams and you expect someone to chase after you, but in the cold, deliberate kind of way where you mean it with every fiber of your being, is that the silence it leaves behind doesn't feel empty at first. It feels like freedom, at least for a while. It's like stepping out of a crowded room you didn't realize was suffocating you until you're in the hallway, breathing air that tastes clean for the first time in years. That's how it felt in those first few days after I blocked my entire family. Clean, quiet, and heavy with the kind of peace that only comes after you finally stop begging people to love you the way you deserve. For once, I wasn't checking my phone every 5 minutes. I wasn't wondering whether they remembered my birthday or if they'd call to ask how my week was going. I wasn't watching from the sidelines as Kayla posted selfies from her new beachfront deck, or smiling through gritted teeth when Mom sent out mass family texts, pretending everything was fine. The noise had stopped, and in that stillness, I started hearing things that had been drowned out for years. My own thoughts, my own wants, my own quiet, angry little voice that had spent a lifetime whispering, "You don't deserve this." But peace doesn't last long in families like mine, not when you suddenly stop playing the role they cast you in from childhood. Because as it turned out, I wasn't invisible to them. Not really. I was useful, predictable, a fixture. And when I removed myself from the script, the whole performance started to collapse. It started with a single voicemail, Dad of all people, who hadn't called me just to chat since maybe the Obama administration. His voice was strained, too cheery to be natural, the kind of tone you hear from a manager trying to pretend the company isn't bankrupt. "Hey Jenna, just calling to check in. Haven't heard from you in a bit. Hope everything's okay. Give us a call when you can." I didn't call back. Then came the messages, first from Mom, full of guilt-laced confusion. "Honey, we miss you. What's going on? Are you upset with something we said?" As if a lifetime of neglect could be boiled down to a single misunderstanding. Then Kayla, who never used to text me unless she needed a babysitter or a favor, suddenly writing, "I don't know what's going on, but I hope you're okay. Can we talk?" Each one of them seemed to be spinning in circles, trying to piece together what changed, like people watching a magic trick and refusing to believe the assistant actually disappeared. But the thing is, I hadn't disappeared. I had simply stopped showing up to play the part they assigned me. And once they realized I wasn't coming back to the fold, their concern started to morph into something else, something messier. They began reaching out to people around me. A cousin I hadn't seen since Christmas messaged me out of the blue. "Your mom's really worried. Maybe just give her a quick call." A mutual friend of Kayla's started liking every photo I posted online, followed by a, "Hey, I think your sister misses you a lot. She talks about you all the time." That was rich. Kayla didn't talk about me all the time. Kayla barely remembered I existed when I was quietly picking up the slack for her emergencies. The final straw came one Tuesday afternoon when I walked out of work to find my mom, my 60-something mother who hated driving into the city, standing in the parking lot like a ghost from a bad dream. She looked smaller than I remembered, older, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. I stood frozen for a moment, watching her watch me, neither of us saying anything. finally, she called out my name like it hurt her throat. "Jenna, can we please talk?" It wasn't the desperation in her voice that struck me. It was the absolute conviction that if she just showed up in person, everything would go back to normal, that I'd cave, the way I always had, and make space for her excuses. But I didn't move. I pulled out my phone, pressed record, and captured her standing there, eyes damp, listing every reason why they didn't mean to hurt me and thought they were doing their best. It was a monologue of half-truths and selective memory, punctuated by just enough tears to make herself the victim. When she finally finished, I stopped recording and sent it to her phone. No caption, no explanation, just the sound of her own voice trying to rewrite history. A few minutes later, I texted her one sentence. "I'm not the villain in your soap opera." I got in my car and drove away. It's strange how quiet the phone was after that. Like they didn't know what to do now that I wasn't responding to guilt or obligation or pity. There were no more voicemails, no more texts. Just a void where all the noise used to be. And in that void, for the first time in a long time, I started to feel like a person again. Not a daughter, not a sister, just Jenna. And the silence, it had a sound now. It sounded like power. There's a particular kind of satisfaction in knowing that sometimes the universe keeps the receipts, even when you stop asking for justice. Because eventually, everything people pretend to be and everything they actually are collides, and the mask starts to slip, not with a scream, but with a whimper, soft and undeniable. That satisfaction came not in the form of an apology from my parents, not from some teary-eyed confession where they finally admitted how deeply they had failed me, but in a notarized envelope with my name printed in clean, sharp ink. A document that proved someone, at some point, saw me and didn't just look through me like furniture. It started, ironically enough, with a death. My Uncle Ron, my mother's only sibling, the kind of man who said little and remembered everything, passed away quietly in his sleep at 78. He was one of those relatives who existed on the outskirts, always present at holidays but never too involved. The one who showed up with small, thoughtful gifts instead of flash or noise. Growing up, he had been my quiet ally, the only adult who spoke to me like I had thoughts worth hearing. While my parents were running late for another of Kayla's dance competitions or forgetting to sign my field trip forms, Uncle Ron would be the one asking how my science project was going or slipping me a folded $10 bill when he saw me nervously eyeing the book section at the drugstore. At the time, I didn't realize those gestures were anything more than kindness. Now I see they were tiny acts of rebellion. A man who watched the favoritism and chose not to play along. His funeral was exactly what you'd expect for a man who didn't care for spectacle. Small, unadorned, attended by a handful of family, most of whom barely knew each other anymore. I went because I had to, not for anyone else, but for the version of myself who used to feel like she only existed when he was in the room. My parents were there, and so was Kayla, of course, in a black dress that hugged her too tightly for a church pew, fake tears in her eyes, dabbing politely with a tissue that stayed dry. We didn't speak, not even a nod. The silence between us had grown so large by then, it had its own presence, a kind of living ghost that hovered behind every glance. A few weeks later, the letter arrived. I almost didn't open it right away, thought it was another estate notice, maybe a tax form, but something about the crispness of the envelope felt deliberate. Inside was a formal notification. Uncle Ron had left me his cabin, a small lakefront property in Michigan he'd owned for over 30 years. I remembered it instantly. Summers spent there when I was 11, 12, 13. The smell of pine and coffee. The creak of the dock at sunset. The way he let me read his dusty crime novels on the porch without asking what a 12-year-old girl was doing with a book like that. He never treated me like I was fragile. He just treated me like I mattered. What I didn't realize until the lawyer clarified it over the phone was that the cabin was worth a hell of a lot more than I remembered. The land had appreciated, the structure was well maintained. It was a modest fortune in the shape of weathered wood and lake breeze. And the best part? It was mine, and only mine. When the news broke, I expected my parents to call. I expected some veiled attempt to smile through it, to play polite, maybe pretend they were happy for me. But they didn't even pretend. Instead, they sent Kayla to do their bidding. She texted me at nearly midnight, something she hadn't done in years. The message was short, sharp, and wrapped in a bow of artificial grace. "Hey, just heard about the cabin. That's surprising. I guess Uncle Ron must have really appreciated you. Maybe we can talk about sharing it, since it's kind of a family place." That one sentence was all I needed to see how quickly love turns into calculation when money is involved. There was no mention of missing me, no question of how I was handling the loss. Just entitlement. A sense of presumed access to something that had never belonged to her, never been touched by her hands or her presence. Instead of replying, I took a trip, drove out to the cabin alone. The drive was long, winding through back roads and past forgotten towns. But the moment I pulled into that familiar gravel drive, something in my chest loosened, like I had come home to a version of myself that had been locked away for decades. I walked through the rooms, ran my hands along the old kitchen table, stepped onto the porch, and listened to the water. And then I did something that felt like reclaiming my own damn story. I poured a drink, sat in the creaky wooden chair facing the lake, took a photo, and posted it online with a caption that said, "More than 1,000 phone calls ever could." Turns out, someone did notice me. The fallout was immediate. My mother called, first once, then 6 times in a row. Dad left a voicemail that started calm and ended with that stiff tone he used when things didn't go his way. Kayla sent a string of passive-aggressive messages, ending with, "You always make everything about you." And just like that, their masks slipped. All those years of pretending we were a family, unraveling with one gesture of acknowledgement from a man who never said much but saw everything. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty, not one bit, because this wasn't revenge. This was recognition. And the thing about recognition is, it doesn't need permission. It just needs to be true. It's strange how the heart can hold contradictions without collapsing. How you can feel both vindicated and hollow, peaceful and angry, all in the same breath, like standing in the eye of a hurricane, watching the wreckage spin around you, while knowing somehow that you're the one who walked into it willingly and then chose not to run. That's how I felt the morning Kayla showed up at the lake house, unannounced and uninvited, standing at the edge of the gravel drive, in designer sneakers that didn't match the dirt, looking like she hadn't slept in days, but was still trying to control the story, to steer the narrative like always. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the text about sharing the cabin, not since I made it clear in silence that I was done being the placeholder, the backup plan, the ghost in my own life. And yet there she was, clutching a reusable coffee cup like it was armor, eyes already glossy with that calculated shimmer she wore when she wanted to be seen as the victim. She didn't knock. She didn't even text. She just stood there, and when I opened the door and stared, she looked at me like she was expecting something, a hug maybe, or a breakdown, or a release of all the tension with one sisterly sob. Instead, I leaned against the door frame and waited. No words, just space, just enough silence to make her nervous. And then she finally spoke, her voice too high, too rehearsed, like a speech she'd practiced in the mirror all night. "Jenna," she said, "I didn't come here to fight. I don't know what happened. I miss you." That last part hit like an old bruise someone pressed a little too hard. Not because it was genuine, but because it wasn't. Because Kayla, who never once noticed when I was hurting, who never once stood up for me or asked how I was doing, or told our parents to stop treating me like wallpaper, had suddenly remembered I existed the moment something valuable was no longer in her orbit. I motioned for her to sit on the porch and stepped back. Not because I wanted her inside, but because I wanted her to see the space I had built without her. This quiet corner of the world where I didn't need applause or permission to exist. She talked. God, did she talk. For over an hour, she poured out memories, half-truths, tearful explanations wrapped in childhood anecdotes, and distorted versions of the past that painted her as oblivious rather than complicit. She said things like, "I never knew you felt this way," and "I thought you liked being the strong one, and you were always so independent. I just assumed you didn't need them the way I did." And for a moment, just a moment, I felt the old reflex kick in, that aching urge to forgive, to smooth it over, to take the high road and tell her it was okay, that we could start fresh, sisters again. But I didn't, because it wasn't okay. It had never been okay. And what she called independence had been abandonment. What she saw as strength had been survival. What she remembered as my quietness had been a child slowly learning that no one was coming. When she finally ran out of breath, I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The silence between us was louder than any apology. I stood up, walked to the door, and held it open. She looked at me then, really looked, for the first time in her life, and I saw something flicker across her face. Not understanding, maybe not even regret, but something close to fear. Fear that I wouldn't come back. That this wasn't a phase. That the sister she'd always counted on as a backup option had finally shut the door. She left without another word. The gravel crunched beneath her as she disappeared down the drive, and I stood there, unmoving, until her car was out of sight, the dust settling back into place like the moment had never happened. I closed the door slowly, not slamming it, not angrily, just closing it with finality, like turning a key in a lock that had rusted shut years ago. Later that night, I sat on the porch with a blanket and a mug of tea, watching the water turn to ink as the sun disappeared behind the trees. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. I glanced down, a message from Dad. The first in weeks. "If you come back now," it read, "we'll make sure you're in the will, full share, no more games." And just like that, everything crystallized. This wasn't about love. It never had been. It was about ownership. About keeping me on the leash long enough to use my silence, my reliability, my presence as a way to hold the family together without ever acknowledging the cracks. I stared at the message for a long while, then hit delete, the same way you might swat a fly off your arm. Not out of rage, just boredom, just done. The stars were out now, scattered across the sky like an apology I no longer needed. I took a deep breath, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to love me better. I didn't feel like I was on hold. I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. And as I leaned back into the chair, letting the quiet wrap around me like a truth that didn't need explaining, I realized something that both hurt and healed at once. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was finally walking home.